Good afternoon, MACPA. Welcome to our August Town Hall. We're so glad that you are here with us. We're going to start with our polling questions as usual. We have our positive focus, which I've switched up for this month to talk about fall. I can't believe summer is almost over. It's somehow flew by. And then our demographic not challenges. We do have demographic challenges in this profession, but our demographic polls to tell us where you work and your role, and then your top challenges. So let's get started with our polls. This first one, we always like to start with that positive focus, always looking to get our brains in that positive mindset, looking forward to something, celebrating something so that we're able to best learn. So cooler weather, falling leaves, college football, amen to that. I am very excited about that. Officiating college volleyball, interesting. CPAs do the most interesting things, right? Fascinating. Cool weather, a new granddaughter, decrease in workload. Somebody's busy season might be winding up, craft shows, Friday night lights, so high school football. Somebody's taking a trip to Europe. Oriole playoffs, yes. I think my husband told me yesterday that the ESPN playoff percentage for the Orioles was at like 99%. So that's looking good. I know my grandmother in particular is going to be very, very excited. She's 97 and I think the world's largest Orioles fan. Someone's leaving for Scotland soon. So all of these wonderful things that we have to celebrate and look forward to in the fall. I'll keep us going and get some of our demographic things here. Let's see. Next slide. There we go. Position or level. Oh, it looks like we skipped the one. I'll go back to that one in a second. So we have, all the horse races moving around. We got our retired folks on here. I'm actually working on a special either town hall or offering for you all in particular about how you can get involved in retirement on a board, nonprofit, working with the Maryland Nonprofit Association, hopefully on something. So be on the lookout for that soon. A lot of high level folks, C-suite, senior management, managers, still no students. We got to get students on here. Couple others. And let's see back, go one slide back so that we can see where do you work? And it's always so tiny. But we have, let's see, sole practitioners. Oh, that made it more tiny. There we go. Some public accounting folks ranging in, gosh, every size of firm we have there. Good showing of people from private accounting, nonprofit and government. And then our retired folks. Thanks for continuing to support and be part of our profession. And then, as we like to do, trying to check in and see, what are your top challenges? What can we as the MACPA do to stay on top of these challenges for you, and then help provide solutions, resources? That's who we are at our core at MACPA, your professional association, to help you navigate the storms of this career. I see finding talent continues to be number one. Maintaining culture, hybrid workforce. Looks like it just got flipped. Oh, now new skills are coming up there. See it move around a little bit more. Looks like it has settled. So the need, as soon as I said it, I'll give a pause and then I'll say, I think it's pretty close between finding talent, the need for new skills, so upskilling and reskilling both ourselves often and our team members, cybersecurity, and then maintaining that culture and environment in our workplace with that hybrid model that a lot of us are working in. And then the impact of inflation, the economy, well-being of our team. Lots going on in this profession. And then if you had an other top challenge, we wanted to know what that was. And that looks like it's keeping up with everything, including energy. I don't know if that's energy of just yourself or in general, but maybe that's what that work-life balance is. Time off, yes. Managing energy. Greg Kondarachi, one of our teachers, used to have a course on that. We'll have to look in getting that back. Storm damage. We did have some crazy storms. I guess that was just last week here in Maryland. We have some future town hall topic ideas. We'll continue to keep that open for you. I'll go ahead and open up all the polls just so you have that available if you didn't get a chance to participate yet. This is our MACPA Foundation annual report. It just came out on Friday, I believe. You've probably got an email about it. Check it out. It's been an amazing couple years in our foundation. Last year, we were able to award over $75,000 in scholarships. And these are real students that those scholarships and those programs pictured there impacted. So thank you for your support. Thank you to our students and our candidate members and our MACPA champions that make this these programs happen. I encourage you to check out the report and consider getting involved in the foundation. 2 ways that you can get involved. The first is just by attending our Women to Watch Awards. That's coming up on September 22nd. One of my favorite events each year. We will be honoring some of the emerging and experienced female leaders in our profession that we're excited to celebrate, and also have them serve as role models for the next generation. So we look to celebrate and inspire at this event. It's going to be a little bit different format, still a breakfast format, but instead of seated tables, we're kind of allowing for a little bit more networking. So we hope that you can join us on September 22nd. And then the mentor program. This has been a program I think we've had it for about 6 or 7 years, had tremendous impact on individuals' careers. And so we ask you, particularly if you're interested in being a mentor, we always need more mentors. So this program is live for applications. You can apply to be a mentee, a mentee, or a mentee, a mentor, or both a mentee and mentor. And we look forward to pairing you with someone and really helping our community grow individually and collectively. Always have to thank our preferred providers, the folks that allow these town halls to be part of your offering at membership here. So this is our group that we work closely with and that really help us stay ahead, especially of things like technology in our profession that's so rapidly changing. And then with that, I am going to introduce our speakers for today. So last night I actually watched a documentary on Netflix called Hall of Shame. Recommend, very interesting. It was about the doping scandal in professional sports surrounding Balco Labs out in California. This is when Barry Bonds was breaking the home run record, and a bunch of other athletes were involved. So why do I mention that as part of this town hall? Well, one of the lead investigators and that they really focused on in that documentary was from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. And so several times during the documentary, they actually brought up on screen a pamphlet, and he talked about how he was recruited and how he got interested in being part of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. And the pamphlet that I showed said, be an accountant that carries a gun. And I just thought that was great. And so I'm excited to say today we have 2 accountants that carry guns. We have 2 special agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division from the DC field office today, Supervisory Special Agent Josh Barnhart and Special Agent Charles Sublett. And they're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be an accountant that carries a gun, talk to us a little bit what it's like to work for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. And I was talking with Josh earlier about the talent challenges that we're seeing in the entire profession, and curious, we see the news, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act, what the talent environment looks like at the IRS. So Josh, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll allow you to share your screen if you wanted to share a little bit about what the talent environment looks like for you all.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so as far as you can let me know if you can see my screen. As far as our talent environment, we're seeing a lot of the it seems like we're seeing a lot of the same challenges that most of you are possibly seeing as well. Based on some of the polling that it looked like was coming up earlier in the presentation, we are having a hard time locating talent and then retaining them as well. So the IRS has done some stuff recently, which is super encouraging as far as for the latter part of that, and retaining the talent we actually have. They started instituting some programs with repaying your student loans and stuff like that we hadn't historically been eligible for in the criminal investigation division, but we're still we're still in the middle of that. And then as far as finding talent, I can kind of get into this a little bit later. We are actively hiring, but we are looking for a very niche group of people, right? So we do have a hard time too. Some of the polling that looked like you guys are also having problems with people with different skill sets. We look for kind of a hybrid between people who have experience in accounting, including like the education experience, and then on top of that, an interest in like law enforcement and kind of like a forensic accounting type approach to things. So it's not always a fit for everyone, and but we are seeing some of those same issues that you guys are as well. But yeah, if you'd like us to go ahead and just get started.
Yeah, go ahead and get started, Josh. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you. And yeah, thanks for the invite. As mentioned, my name is Josh Barnhart. I'm the supervisor, one of the supervisors in the DC field office. We have two groups in DC that work just regular tax, general program groups that I call them. And then we have several specialty units, which we'll get into later. And just, I guess, a little bit about me before we get started. So I started with the IRS in 2012 as a auditor, as a revenue agent. You guys obviously are familiar with the terminology. So it didn't take me long to realize that I had an interest in forensic accounting and kind of looking at things from more criminal focus. So I, eventually wound up over on the criminal side. About 3 years later, I did spend some time working for our internal affairs office as well, the Inspector General. So that's me. I'm joined with Charles Sublett. Charles is an agent in our group in DC. So Charles, you want to give a little background about you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. So yeah, as Josh said, we're with IRS Criminal Investigation. We both have sort of the CPA background. I started my career I got a master's in accounting from Virginia Tech and went straight to Deloitte, where I worked in audit for about 2 years. I did 2.5 more years at Deloitte in forensic accounting. Similar to Josh, I had, a great interest in the sort of forensic accounting aspect of this job and wanted something a little more exciting that could get me out from behind the desk. So I started applying for law enforcement jobs. I really did enjoy sort of the accounting investigation. So that's what led me to IRS CI. But I joined here almost 5 years ago now. And it's been a blast ever since. Get a lot of that excitement that I didn't quite get in public accounting, but still get to sort of flex my accounting muscles. So it's a great place to be.
Great, thanks. And yeah, if you guys have questions and stuff, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll just be answering them as we go. So we're hoping to keep this relatively informal. But so today, obviously, the goal of the presentation, there we go, is to go through the IRS. We'll give you just kind of an overview of CI and kind of what we do in CI, and then we can talk about some of the types of investigations that we work. And our investigative priorities, because we do not do just tax cases. So we investigate all kinds of stuff from, money laundering, drug cases, doping scandals, you name it. So, and then we will talk a little bit about criminal investigation versus the civil examination functions of the IRS, whether it be exam or collections. And then kind of, we can get into any questions you might have. And we'll just go from there. So IRS CI overview, this is from our 2022 CI, the annual report. So criminal investigation is the law enforcement arm of the IRS. So basically we are the only federal law enforcement agency that can investigate tax crimes. So, where the FBI or the DEA, they can both investigate drug cases and stuff like that. The IRS has the unique authority, or we're the only agency that can investigate the Internal Revenue Code, including the criminal violations. So IRS criminal investigation does all of that. We have about 3,000 IRS CI divisional employees. That's about a little over 2,000 special agents. Those are the armed law enforcement officers, and then we have professional staff. So we have anywhere from data analytics, data scientists. We have investigative analysts, investigative assistants, and then obviously secretaries. Everything you name it is within CI. And we've recently been trying to, you can kind of see of our numbers, to balance out the amount of professional staff we have with agents as well, because it helps kind of just due to the nature of our investigations. The investigations are getting larger, and the need for professional staff to assist with those investigations is growing as well. Last year in 2022, we identified $5.7 billion in tax fraud, and then $26.9 billion in other financial crimes. We executed our 1,210 warrants. So, as I'll get into earlier, kind of when we talk a little bit about what we do. So we are, federal law enforcement officers. So we do our own search warrants, we conduct our own arrest warrants, and it is your stereotypical people. It's not always us banging down a door. We do that, but, sometimes we're arresting people at their offices due to the nature of the crimes they're committing and stuff like that. But we do all that stuff ourselves. A lot of people are very surprised that IRS does have agents carrying weapons and they have that authority. So I just always find that interesting to point out. And then last year, it looks like we referred 1,837 cases for prosecution. Because we have such a broad authority as the IRS in general, we do have our very extensive civil function and the criminal penalties. I personally think that's one of the major reasons why our conviction rate, you can see right there, is a 90.6. So when we have cases that are, we think we're going to have a problem proving that beyond a reasonable doubt, right, the criminal elements of the crimes, then we do always, reach out to our civil partners, and there's a remedy there as well. So, go to the next slide. 2.97 petabytes of digital data. I don't even know what that is, but that seems like a very large number. So as far as CI special agents, what do we do on a daily basis, right? So we are the only federal law enforcement agency that investigates 100%. 100% of our investigations involve financial crimes. Most other agencies involve other things, right? So we are the accounting nerds. We do all of our cases are financial crimes. But that being said, we do get involved in a ton of different things just due to the nature of the criminal activity in general. Most criminal enterprises need funding. People, for the most part, commit these crimes for the financial incentives in doing so. So we find ourselves involved in a whole bunch of different types of investigations. We combine our accounting skills with law enforcement, so that's not always a combination you would see. We go, we'll get into this later, but we'll, everything from reviewing documents, looking at the general ledger, bank statements, compiling an analysis, putting together, work papers, to doing interviews, documenting the interviews in a memorandum, writing reports, doing enforcement operations, doing surveillance. We do undercover operations as well. So we have undercover operations going on all over the world, not just in the United States. And then we also have some specialty groups, right? So we do, right now, cybercrimes is huge. We have 2 cybercrimes units, and then we have a group of them at headquarters also who are assisting the rest of the agency with their cybercrimes investigations. That's anything from traditional, you're not reporting the capital gains related to the sales of these the different cryptocurrencies, to obviously dark web type stuff, utilizing that those different types of currencies to fund the criminal activity.
We did have a question related to that $5.7 billion in related. That's just crazy identified. And the question is most of that, do you think, or what percentage related to COVID funds? I'm sure there's a percentage of that, but just curious.
Good question. Yeah, I don't, to be honest, I don't think any of that probably, unless it's specifically related to the employee retention credit that we kind of talk about later, would be actually included in that amount. I think the way that we track our numbers, I think the COVID fraud stuff would be probably in that second category of the 26.9 billion of other financial crimes. So a lot of the different violations that we can recommend prosecution on for the COVID crimes falls under the Title 18 of the United States Code. So it's basically a non-tax crime, but it's tax related because they're using oftentimes tax return information to commit these crimes. And, you know, that's just internally how we track it. So good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, so just a little bit into the training. We do attend a 6-month law enforcement training down at the law enforcement training centers in Georgia. That's where every other federal law enforcement agency goes for their training. It's, well, except for the FBI, they have their own training academy, but we work with agents from the ATF, any of the Inspector General's office, Homeland Security investigations. We all train together at the federal law enforcement training centers. So you'll go through basically a basic training. They call it criminal investigator training program. And then we go to, only IRS agents will go to a specialized IRS training where we learn how to investigate. It's very, you know, financial crimes, which is a lot of times very different than what you would learn for some of the other agencies. So that's down in Georgia. You know, it's everything from defensive tactics. You can see up there on the right where you're learning how to, that's a mat room, so you'd be wrestling each other and learning how to arrest techniques, putting people in handcuffs, escorting prisoners and stuff like that. And then the firearms range, you know, we learn how to, they teach you everything from how to shoot a pistol, the pistols that we carry on a daily basis, to, you know, long guns and those types of things. So, you know, a lot of people get nervous about that. You don't require prior experience with handguns or anything before accepting this job. So I had never touched a weapon before I started working here. And, you know, but they do teach you everything you need to know down at FLETC. Okay, so where do we get our investigations? This information is from the 2022 annual report, so this is last year. As you can see, the bulk of our investigations come from the United States Attorney's Office and other federal law enforcement agencies. You know, the United States Attorney's Office, I don't know how much everybody's familiar with how the justice system works in the United States, but they're the prosecutors on behalf of the government, right? So for them to prosecute something, they need an agency to investigate. So oftentimes they'll come into contact with people or some indications of some criminal activity, and they would think that it's there's potential tax crimes there, so they would reach out to the IRS, and we would provide an agent to work the case with the prosecutor. So generally, we work hand in hand with the prosecutor's office to bring our cases to trial or some kind of pretrial resolution. So that's where we get most of our cases. Other federal law enforcement agencies as well. So we have our law enforcement partners from the FBI, the DEA, any of the inspectors generals. You know, even if it's not a criminal function, we may get referrals from any kind of federal agency that is doing their work, right? That they're and they come in contact with some potential criminal activity that involves, you know, either tax crimes or tax related crimes, and we'll find out about that. Then you can see that we do get a lot of our cases as well are internally generated cases. So we do have a very robust data analytics capability here at the IRS. So we are actively looking for our own investigations based on what we can identify as areas that we deem to be like a threat to the enforcement of our nation's tax laws. So we'll be doing data analytics based on the information we have, and kind of generate our own investigations there. Some of the other ways from the public, right? So maybe it's one of the practitioners, you may come across some kind of indication of fraud in your dealings with your clients, or maybe just in your, you know, personal life, whatever the case may be. There's, you know, you can contact a local agent. You can send me an email if your mind's starting to work, and we'll get you assigned to an agent. You know, we get anywhere from like anonymous complaints to our hotline that we will investigate. And yeah, that's about it. You can see the rest of them on there. We do get some referrals from the civil side of the IRS. So somebody might be involved in an examination or some kind of collection activity, and the revenue agent or officer on the civil side will come in contact with a taxpayer who they believe potentially may be kind of crossing that line between, everybody cheats on their taxes to, okay, they're doing some nefarious activity here, they're finding affirmative acts of evasion, and they may call us and make a referral, and we'll kind of take responsibility of the investigation. Charles, anything to add there?
The only thing I'll add is, did you touch on Financial Crimes Enforcement Network?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, it's within the Department of Treasury, and they track sort of reports of suspicious activity from banks, items like that. It's a huge source for us for investigations as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I'm glad you brought that up. So we do have agents in I think all of the jurisdictions within the U.S. Attorney's offices around the country who sit on a financial crimes task force, basically. That most of them are run actually by the IRS. So we here in DC, it's a very robust task force. We have agents from, Charles is actually the coordinator of it. We have agents from across all federal law enforcement agencies. Most of the inspectors generals are there. The DEA, ATF, FBI. So we'll work together on those cases. Sometimes it's a good area for us not only to review those reports that come out from FinCEN, where the banks, casinos, or some other entities are reporting their suspicious activities, and we do review those. They don't go into a black hole somewhere. We review them every month. We have a threshold that we have to look at, but it is a great opportunity for us to partner with other federal law enforcement agencies as well, where we kind of increase our network and get cases that way.
And I'll just mention to our members, if FinCEN, that Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, sounds familiar, hopefully it does, because I've been reminding you all a couple times about the new beneficial ownership information reporting that's going to go into effect January 1st, 2024, and some of the resources we have around that, because there's some steep fines, and we want to make sure that you all, especially our practitioners, are aware of that. So if that sounded familiar and you didn't know why, I just made that connection for you all.
Great, thank you. Okay, so what are the types of investigations we work? You can see most of our, and historically, given what I said before, we are the only federal law enforcement agency that can investigate tax crimes. And given our numbers, compared to some of the larger law enforcement agencies, we do focus most of our resources into criminal tax violations. I think just recently we're still like the 6th largest federal law enforcement agency in the US. So we're not exactly at the top, but there are about 96, which is an extremely large number. Most people have no idea how many agencies there are. But if there's a federal agency, they most of the time have a law enforcement component through their IG's office. So, we're still the 6th largest, but that being said, we're still relatively small. So we do try to let the other agencies focus on everything else and us spend most of our time working in tax crimes. So our tax cases can go anywhere from, corporate fraud to public corruptions. I talked about cyber crimes on there, general tax fraud, right? Just the general tax return. Maybe you file a tax return, you're a business owner, you're making up all kinds of fraudulent deductions to lower your tax liability, or, taking all these steps to hide income so that the IRS isn't aware of money that you're earning. That would be under just our general tax fraud program. Employment tax right now is huge for us. A lot of companies are, and I hate to say it, it's very easy for us to use our data analytics to find, because a lot of times, if you're engaged in this large employment tax scheme, most of the time your employees want their W-2s, right? And they're going to start figuring out somehow that somebody's playing games with the withholdings in, they're not paying them over to the IRS. So we see a lot of that.
We did have a question
Sure.
a little about employment tax. It says, does the IRS investigate the lost tax revenue from workers who are paid out of business checks that are cashed at check cashing companies, and the workers are paid in cash?
Yeah, that would be that would fall
those.
under an employment tax scheme.
Mhm.
So basically, if you're paying your employees in tax or in cash, there's a couple different areas that would impact the tax code, right? So not only if you're not issuing a 1099, that income may not be being reported by the employee themselves or the independent contractor. So depending on the materiality of that, the IRS may look at that. Or, if they're supposed to be an employee and you're paying them under the table as a contractor, you're not paying your Social Security taxes and the FICA taxes. So that's where we come into our employment tax investigations. And it's actually very common where they go to like a check casher. I think we have 2 cases in my group right now that is just that's the scheme. So people get mad, right? So that's how we get a lot of our cases. They're required to file all these currency transaction reports when you go into cash a check at a check casher. And, a lot of times we can use that data to identify common sources of income and see kind of who's not necessarily reporting what they're supposed to be reporting.
You mentioned like a materiality limit. Someone asked about, what is there a level that determines these issues that you would pursue, like a dollar amount, nature of crime? Is it a combination of those things?
It is. It's a combination, and it depends on geographically where you're located. So that number changes. Most recently, I don't know if it's not necessarily from it seems very common to us because we talk about it a lot, but I don't know if people have heard about the changes to the sentencing guidelines that are coming out. And this kind of gets into the weeds, but the sentencing guidelines are basically, they used to be mandatory and now they're no longer mandatory, but the judges have to consider them when they're passing down their sentences on their defendants. So there have been some changes recently that if you are a first-time offender, it reduces kind of the calculation as to what your sentence is, what they're recommending your sentence to be. So our biggest drive and how we can control what we think a sentence would be, that's not our job, but we are aiming to find the most impactful investigations, right? Because if they make it to the news, like, oh, I probably shouldn't cheat on my taxes because, my doctor just got convicted of tax evasion, versus for instance, if we, were to be working criminal investigations on somebody who just was maybe a day like laborer who may have made $20,000 in a year, what's the tax loss and what's the chance of that making public news? So there's not a lot of general deterrence there as far as deterring the rest of the public. So yeah, those are some factors that go into a tax loss, or what we think the tax loss would be is a big one for us. What type of crime it is. There are certain things that, like, if we're asked to assist with an investigation, we'll do it regardless if we think the loss is there. Who the person is, I hate to say it, but it's not, these are all, does the person are they a sophisticated individual, right? Are they educated? Do they know what they're doing is wrong? We have to know that we can prove not only that they did the crime, right, but they did it intentionally to violate the Internal Revenue Code, which is a hard thing for us to prove. So we have to spend a lot of time uncovering information about it's called willfulness, right? So what they know about their filing requirement, did they know this money wasn't being reported, those types of things. So it is a combination of everything. We do have like a minimum amount that we generally won't recommend prosecution for, but it's different in every jurisdiction. So as far as non-tax, money laundering is probably the biggest part of our non-tax cases in OCDETF. OCDETF is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. So we do have agents who sit on the OCDETF. And, for you to have a money laundering charge, you need to have a illegal activity, right? That's how we define money laundering. And that's kind of how we get into all these other types of investigations that we're talking about. So not just the tax crimes, but we do have agents on drug task forces. We have whole groups of agents working drug task forces in some of the larger jurisdictions, like New York. They call it the strike force. So we have agents up there who their entire group works drug cases. So we find ourselves involved in a lot of stuff like that. General fraud, sometimes there may just be like, I think that's probably where the COVID fraud would land. And that would be, filing false documents to get an SBA loan or something similar to that. Okay. So I kind of touched on these, but general tax fraud, that's the largest one for us. Probably it's our core of our law enforcement efforts. And it's meant, like I said, to foster compliance and public confidence in tax law. So we do that by, trying to get the best cases we can find, the most high dollar cases we can find. And, that's not being said, if we come across one that we don't think will meet our threshold, we always refer to our civil counterparts, and they will take care of that. There's a lot more of them. It takes less resources to bring, a case on a civil, in civil, I forget what it's called now. I spent like 3 years over there, but it's examination or whatever for you to have, for them to prove that. It takes a little bit less resources than it does to, bring a criminal case to trial. So people aren't just getting away with everything. We do have a much more broad agency focus to it. But yeah, common scheme characteristics, right? Like double sets of books, false deductions, hiding assets. We see a lot of people putting stuff in nominee names, consulting fees going to, a related entity, all these types of things, these stereotypical ideas in our heads of what we've all been told is what a potential scheme is. That's what we kind of investigate. And I hate to say we spend a lot of time catching the people who are dumb about it, but we do. We do. That's kind of where we spend a lot of our time. Charles, do you have anything to add to that?
No, just one of the bigger ones here, false deduction. So that's people paying personal expenses through a business and deducting it like a business expense. I've never seen a case without that. So, but yeah, thanks, Josh.
Yeah, another big one in this area is refund fraud program. And this might be very relevant to the practitioners because we do, we send undercover agents into suspected false return preparer offices all the time during filing season. Everybody's heard of it, I'm sure. And we really do that. And that's how we find the best cases. Frankly, in a lot of these areas, they won't even recommend charging somebody who hasn't been on camera, filing false returns, but it is extremely hard for someone to, explain in a courtroom setting when there's a video of them preparing a false return for an IRS agent who's undercover. So we do that a lot. That's how we find our cases. That we have the Scheme Development Center in each of the major campuses, service centers around the country, and they use data analytics to identify some, common characteristics that they'll send it out to the field, and we'll go out and just send somebody in with a camera on just to see what's going on and stuff like that. So these are all part of our our law enforcement capabilities. I think questionable refund fraud was basically false clients and false returns. That used to be a lot more prevalent. The IRS has gotten better at identifying these types of schemes. But that was basically if we would just find people sitting in a coffee shop somewhere making up all kinds of fake, stealing identities from like a business or whatever the case may be, and just sitting there filing false returns. Just getting the refunds. So it's obviously a little bit more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, that's basically what that is. And then we did talk a little bit about employment tax fraud earlier, pyramiding, right? A business withholds. We just had a case that made the news where the subject pled guilty in DC. And that was worked out of our group where this person had been, previously convicted in 2006. They served time in jail. They got out, started doing exactly the same thing they were doing before. And, we investigated it. They worked on the civil side for a very long time. Then it was referred to us by our civil partners. And, this individual, they're still awaiting sentencing. It's an ongoing investigation, but the person just had pled guilty in federal court about it about 2 weeks ago. It was a pretty well-known business center in DC. So some of our specialized units. So we do, like I said, we work international tax and financial crimes. I have a slide on that later, so I'll skip that. Same thing with the global illicit financial team. But we actually also have an interesting, I always think this is interesting. IRSCI has an agreement with the alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. So they're another much smaller federal agency, and we actually provide their criminal enforcement capabilities. So we have a group of agents who we jokingly call them the revenuers, but they're out running around like in the olden days with prohibition, people like violating federal tobacco tax rules. And honestly, we probably should research them if we have any more questions, but it's always very fascinating. You always see them, out in some random field somewhere in Western United States at some kind of tobacco factory or something. But they do very interesting work. Our cyber crimes unit is really, really fascinating. I mean, if you think about it, it's basically like you're creating the blockchain and they're analyzing this blockchain. We have some of the best analysts in the world working with us to investigate these crimes, stuff that I cannot even begin to pretend like I understand. But you work with them, they work hand in hand with the agents. These are federal contractors who are very, very, very skilled at what they do. And if you just think about the wealth of information, on the blockchain, you're basically conducting all your financial transactions out in the open for everybody to look at, right? So the way that works, they're trying to find out who these different wallets are, who are passing money around. It is a very fascinating area of kind of like our criminal enforcement. And then we even have stuff like the commissioner's protection detail, right? So we have to protect the commissioner. So we have, those agents with the little thingies in their ear running around with our commissioner, making sure nobody does anything. Because everybody hates the IRS, and most people don't know what I look like or what Charles looks like, but they definitely can Google and see what the commissioner looks like. So he gets our protection. But yeah, you can see some of our highly trained actors on a undercover operation, it appears, down there on the bottom slide. But this is actually Charles's case up here in the top left, where we see the Bentley, which was pretty good. So, oops. All right, next. International, yeah. So we do have an increasing presence around in the U.S. or overseas, right? So we do everything from international tax crimes, people who are evading taxes, who maybe are a U.S. person who lives abroad. Everything from offshore accounts, you name it, to FBARs. So we have the Global Illicit Financial team as well. They do global illicit financial transactions. So basically it's a partnership with Homeland Security Investigations, and it's more or less like an international money laundering group. And it's an entire group of agents that are based out of DC, and all they do is investigate international money laundering. And this is, you can see where we actually have agents and attachés stationed around the world. So we have agents in Sydney, Hong Kong. The newest one is Dubai. We actually have an attaché in Dubai, London, The Hague, Frankfurt. So we actually participate in the J5. It's the joint 5 countries who basically have come together to share information and assist each other with their investigations. So we do have our international presence is growing. As I said, one of the most fascinating things I found is that IRS has not only do have agents overseas who are stationed there permanently or for like on very long details, but we have undercover operations going on. We travel internationally for our cases all the time. We're constantly going to countries. We're working out of the embassies, working with the attachés for the other law enforcement agencies to kind of get the work done that we need to get done. I talked about the cyber crimes unit in Ignatium, but they were started in 2015. We have one in DC and one in Los Angeles. So I always find their work very fascinating. I did have the privilege of working with one of their analysts on one of my investigations that was focusing on terrorism. And they probably wake up in the morning and forget more than you and I probably will ever know about cyber crimes, because it is just very fascinating, and the amount of capabilities they have. And this just kind of goes through some of our non-tax crimes. I talked about money laundering, basically underground economy by making proceeds from illicit activities look legitimate. That is in a nutshell how we would quantify or describe a money laundering investigation. Everything from layering transactions, crypto, black market, moving funds internationally, those types of things. And then the Bank Secrecy Act, we're the only agency that has, I believe, the FinCEN, which you talked about earlier. They don't have federal law enforcement jurisdiction, so they don't have criminal investigators working there that do a criminal investigative function. So they may have some analysts and stuff that work with us, but they don't have the authority to investigate their criminal violations of their code. So we enforce the Bank Secrecy Act anywhere from like financial institutions failing to file currency transaction reports, bank secrecy, suspicious activity reports. And not only do we do their criminal enforcement, but we're the largest, if not we're one of the largest consumers, if not the largest consumer of their data, right? Because in general, these are financial reports. Every time we're looking for a case in our group, that's the easiest way to go. We just get into FinCEN, start surfing around, and it takes like an hour or 2 hours, and we could find another investigation because there are just so much going on, and our resources are so limited that these things, and not that they go into a black hole, right? We definitely are looking at them actively, but it's not hard to find, right? If you go into a bank and tell the bank that you don't feel like paying taxes on this, so you're going to put it in, you want to take out $100,000 in cash and go pay your employees, they write it down and they send a letter to us, right? So, that's just kind of how it works. Let's see. And then this one might be interesting. Charles, you might be able to talk more about this. This is something that we haven't really seen a lot of. I think we thought we were going to see a ton of it when this first came out. I will say, to the IRS's credit, they've gotten very good at identifying some of these fraudulent retention credit. Because to be honest, we're having a hard time finding a tax loss large enough to satisfy some of our requirements. So we are getting really good at it. Not that that's not out there, and I'm sure it will be a big issue for years to come. But the IRS is seemingly really good at finding these fraudulent, the fraudulent employee retention credit. Charles, do you want to talk any more about that?
Yeah, so this is something, like Josh said, the IRS is taking their time with this, unlike the Paycheck Protection Program and all the fraud that I think we saw happen with that, where money was just going out as quick as possible. IRS is doing a bit more diligence on the front end here to identify the fraud prior to issuing the checks. So on the criminal end, we'll focus on those checks that get issued that are fraud. But yeah, IRS seems to be doing a really good job with this. So that's kind of refreshing.
Yes. Not that we're not always doing good jobs with things. You guys all work with us, so we understand that we're difficult partners. So
yeah. I have had members ask, and I know I get at least 1, 2, maybe 3 a day or a week emails from folks that say, I can help you get ERC. Did you get your ERC? Yeah. Here, you can get up to this. What are that you say you're kind of more working on the front end of this? Is that including kind of tackling some of those more fraudulent or kind of sketchy, best word, service providers? Yeah,
so that's an interesting question. We are doing that. So a lot of it's twofold, right? So we're using data and the information that we have to try to identify common characteristics of these fraudulent schemes and stop them from happening. And with that, often you see a lot of these companies that are out there kind of pushing these ERCs on people who generally wouldn't necessarily be otherwise eligible. So we are investigating that. And those are kind of tips. Like if you come across that, we all see them. You see them on TV, you get the phone calls. Yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff with that. It's pretty much in line with kind of how we do other things with return preparers, right? So we have, everywhere from undercover operations to just identifying common areas or common, companies that are using these things, and necessarily, hey, if like 50% of your clients necessarily are eligible for this magically, but like 10% across the rest of the United States of taxpayers are generally historically eligible for this, stuff like that. We all, it's a very easy way to kind of like identify that. Mm-hmm. So we'll get tips from people, we'll get all kinds of reports, and then, we just kind of go from there to work the investigation. But yeah, so if you have anybody in mind, just send me an email.
I get at least 3 emails a week. So of people that emails very poorly written, but they want to, help me get my ERC, which, we are done with. Yeah. So yes,
I think that's why we all were very concerned. This was at the beginning of the year. They usually have like they send out a message to all the supervisors in the areas in our areas of responsibility, and they have us with our teams come up with what we think is going to be a huge threat to tax enforcement that year. And this was number one, I think, for everyone, because we were all, like you said, it seemed like it was so rampant, and I'm sure it is, but we are, like Charles said, taking our time and rolling these payments out, and hopefully stopping a lot of the potential fraud on the front end, which you don't always have the opportunity to do. So I think it was like, what, 20 years long that you were able to, we would find all these return preparers who were just depositing hundreds of checks into their bank accounts, and their clients were none the wiser. And we finally were able to find a way to put it in our system and limit how many deposits you can get into your bank account and stuff like that. So sometimes it takes a while for us to catch up, but that's job security, I guess. Just kidding. All right, let's see. This kind of just goes through what are some of the indicators of fraud. And I don't want to read that to you guys. I'll let you take a look at that. Okay, so a lot of people, this is probably one of the most common questions we get from practitioners is what differentiates like our threshold, and I think we actually talked a little bit about it earlier, to make a criminal case, and it really is the burden of proof. So we like to think we're trying to select the most egregious cases that we think would set an example if they were published in the news. And those are the types of cases that we're working. That being said, the burden of proof is different. So we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the different elements of the crime. And the one thing about a tax crime that is different than any other crime, right? So if let's say, this is a drastic example, but somebody robbed a bank, right? We didn't have to prove that they went to the bank and robbed it, and they took all these actions for the sole purpose of robbing the bank and all this stuff, right? The bank was robbed. We caught you with a bag of money out. We saw you on video camera doing it, whatever. The IRS is a little bit different, right? Because it's a financial crime. And tax law, it's called specific intent crime. So we have to prove that you specifically intended to violate the tax law. So even for instance, if you were out there not paying your taxes, you just decided, I'm not going to file a tax return. I don't care. The IRS isn't going to come find me, and you just decided not to. So, we have to prove sometimes that you took like specific actions or specific things to, now I'm not saying go out. We should probably get a list of attendees on here just in case we need to get that information later. But I'm just kidding. But like at the end of the day, if you weren't taking specific actions to evade the IRS to stop us from doing what we need to do, then it's hard for us to prove that you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that you knew what you were doing and you did it intentionally. So that is kind of where the burden of proof lies. And that being said, a lot of times I'm always a proponent of, if we think we're not going to be able to put this person in jail, where does it hurt people when you hit them? It's their pocketbook, right? So at the end of the day, it's like, all right, I don't know a single business owner out there who would, granted, they probably don't want to go to jail, but they're also not going to want to part with millions of dollars, right? That they have to pay to the IRS through the civil function. So, and then these are just some things I like to throw out there for people, badges of fraud. Like, so if you identify fraudulent acts that you think are designed to mislead or conceal, right? So if you're through the course of your business, right? If you're preparing tax return for somebody and you see they have their every month they're paying their daughter, right? And they're pretending that it's going to a business and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, they're evading all this tax. Maybe their daughter's not reporting it on her return, those types of things. Those are the types of things that we look for, right? Those are steps that this person has taken outside of the just forgetting to report their income, right? So these are acts that everyone's taking every month. They write the check to this company. They, sometimes we'll find these people are involved in setting up these companies and those types of things. So, if you see that stuff and you feel like you need to report that somewhere, you can go to the IRS website, or you can call, send us an email, or reach out to some of your contacts. There's definitely ways to report people and get in touch with us without us basically putting you on the front page of CNN. Willfulness, the definition is a voluntary intentional violation of of their known legal duty, right? So they knew they had a duty to file their taxes and they intentionally and voluntarily did that, or did not do that. All right, and this is my hiring push. So contrary to popular belief, the IRS, we do have direct hire authority right now. So if you find people, circulated around, we're thinking that we may also be hiring people within the next year or so. We may have this, it's called this direct hiring authority. Is something we has historically not had at the IRS. for special agents, it really does streamline the process. Like we're seeing people go from interview to a class date in Georgia within 3 months, 2 months, which usually it would take much longer. Our salary for the federal workforce is competitive with all the, the different, we get the same benefits that every other federal law enforcement officer gets, right? Like retirement at mandatory retirement at 57 with your full pension. Most people are eligible to retire at 50. We get take-home vehicles, we get an extra pay because we do work. We have, it's called law enforcement availability pay, so we have to be available more or less 24/7. So we get paid for that, and we end up having to work on average 10 to probably still, Charles, you can speak to this from working in the public sector. It's laughable to tell you guys about how much we have to work, but we work more than most other federal employees, right? So that's why we get paid more. So we're not just getting it handed out. We have to average, 10% or 10 additional hours a week. So that's where the 25% comes out. But that's where the DC field office too has offices. We have offices obviously in DC, Baltimore, Salisbury, Maryland, Landover, Maryland, Richmond, Vienna, Roanoke, Norfolk, and Bridgeport. So we cover DC, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia here in the Washington DC field office. But we have positions nationwide. So that's all I have. I don't know if
we did have I'll see if Charles had anything he wanted to add, but we do have 2 other questions I was going to ask.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, I think Josh hit the nail on the head there. Happy to answer some questions.
Yeah. So what agency actually takes your cases to court is the question.
Yeah, good question. So how it works for us, we do the investigation, and then we basically make a referral to the Department of Justice that this person should be prosecuted for tax crimes, right? So it works, it's a little bit different depending on whether it's a tax crime or a regular crime. But at the end of the day, all of the cases are tried in court by the Department of Justice, whether it's the local United States Attorney's Office or one of the larger branches of the Department of Justice, for instance, like the Department of Justice Tax Division. So sometimes they will prosecute our cases in partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office, but it's either the United States Attorney's Office or the Department of Justice.
And then the last question we had was, does a review or investigation of SARS reports fall in the IRS area?
Yeah, that's what we do. So that's when they say the consumer, that's a good question. So if I must not have made it clear, like when we say we're reviewing those documents, a lot of times that 16% I think was on the front, one of the front slides, but that is cases that we have reviewed a SAR. It has led us to a subject, and we've initiated an investigation based on that information. So we do use that constantly. That probably doesn't, I don't know if that accounts for currency transaction reports, but even if it's not generated from an investigation, we use that stuff all the time in our investigations, whether it's to find additional bank accounts that we weren't aware of, so we can reach out through FinCEN and have them basically send out a mass email for all the people who are participating in that network to let us know where these people have bank accounts, and then they'll share that information. So if we're not getting a tip from FinCEN or a SAR or a CTR, some kind of like FinCEN document that we would actually use to initiate our investigation, I could probably say without the shadow of a doubt that in almost all of our cases, we're checking FinCEN to see if there's any information available to assist with developing and progressing the case forward.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Josh and Charles, for being here, for kind of giving us a insight into this niche area of our profession and the work that you all do. Thank you so much. And MACPA members, will see you on September 22nd. Well, hopefully I'll see you September 22nd at our Women to Watch Awards, if you can join us there. But otherwise, we'll see you for our September Town Hall on September 26th. That's going to be in the morning from 9 to 10. And I saw a couple people put in the poll about AI being a topic that they want to hear. We're actually going to hear from Will Bible at Deloitte about AI at Deloitte, and some about ChatGPT, which I know we've talked a lot about as well. So look forward to seeing you all virtually then, and hopefully before then at the Women to Watch Awards. Thank you so much, Josh and Charles. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.